I had always been the type of person who thrived on routine. Wake up, go to work, do my job, head home, and repeat. There was a certain comfort in it, even though I had been with Smith Industries for nearly 5 years. A lot had changed over time. People came and left. The office moved twice. But it always felt like I was just another cog in the machine. Sure, I worked hard and gave it my best, but it seemed like I would never break out of that endless cycle. And to be honest, I was okay with that. It was simpler that way. That morning, I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen. Nothing unusual, just the usual list of emails to get through, reports to finish, and the steady hum of the office in the background. My coffee was at the perfect temperature as I sipped it, staring at the blank document on my screen. I didn't have a particular task to focus on, and for once, it felt like I could actually breathe. But that feeling didn't last long. From the corner of my eye, I saw my phone vibrate. It was a message from my boss, Charles Smith. "Can you come to my office for a minute?" I stared at the message for a second, a cold shiver running down my spine. Why did he want to see me? Charles wasn't the type to call meetings over trivial matters, so my mind immediately started to race. Did I mess up? Was I about to be reprimanded? I couldn't recall doing anything wrong, but the feeling of dread crept in. I stood up from my desk and walked down the long hallway to his office. The office buzz felt louder than usual, and I couldn't quite figure out why. Maybe I was overthinking it, but I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. When I reached Charles's office door, I knocked, trying to hide the anxiety in my chest. "Come in," he called. I opened the door and stepped inside. There he was, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk in his usual gray suit, his silver hair neatly combed back. But today, something felt different. An unease in the air. I wasn't sure if it was just me, but I immediately sensed that something was off. And then I saw her, sitting across from Charles, casually flipping through a magazine. Was his wife, Julia. My stomach sank. I had met Julia several times before, usually at company events or parties. She was always polite, smiling and chatting with everyone. At least, that was what I thought I knew about her. She was the epitome of sophistication. Young, beautiful, and always surrounded by luxury. A little distant, a little too perfect. I had never really had a conversation with her beyond a polite greeting. And to be honest, I always felt a little out of place around her, though I had no reason to. She was, after all, married to my boss. Still, there was something about her presence that made me uneasy. Charles looked at me, his usual stern expression softening slightly as he motioned for me to sit. "Aiden, have a seat. We need to talk." I sat down, my nerves intensifying. I had no idea what this was about, but Julia's presence only made me more anxious. What could this be? Why did they need me? Charles cleared his throat and leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together in front of him. "I've been thinking, Aiden. You've been with the company for a long time. You're dependable, hardworking, and I trust you." His voice was steady, but there was an underlying weight to his words that made me feel even more tense. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. "Thanks. I appreciate that," I managed to say. Charles paused for a moment, his eyes locking with mine before continuing. "I have a task for you. A big one." My heart rate quickened. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. This had to be the conversation where I either got a promotion or was shown the door. "What kind of task?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He leaned back in his chair. "It's a special assignment," he said. "We're sending you on a business trip to China, but you won't be going alone." He looked over at Julia. "You'll be traveling with Julia." I blinked. "Excuse me?" Julia looked up from her magazine, meeting my gaze with a slight smile. Her eyes seemed amused, though I couldn't tell if it was genuine happiness or something else she was hiding. But her smile did little to ease my confusion. "You'll be traveling with Julia," Charles repeated, his tone serious. "She has some things she needs to take care of, and I trust you to help her with them." I just stared at him, speechless. Did he really just ask me to go on a business trip to China with his wife? This wasn't just a typical task. It was surreal. The last thing I expected was to be paired with Julia Smith, a woman whose world seemed so far removed from mine. but I had no choice but to nod. He had made up his mind, and there was nothing I could do about it. Of course, I said, my voice distant and detached from my racing thoughts. I'll do it. Charles nodded approvingly. Good. You leave tomorrow evening. Get packed. I'll have a car pick you up from your place, and you'll both leave first thing in the morning. I didn't know how to react. 1,000 questions swirled in my head, but there was nothing I could do now. It was already decided. I was going to China with Julia. That evening, I packed my things, still trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. I had never been on a business trip this significant before, let alone with my boss's wife. The entire situation felt strange, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to step into something that would change everything. I spent the night tossing and turning, unable to sleep. I wasn't sure if it was the nerves or the uncertainty of what the next day would bring. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip would be unlike anything I had ever experienced. The next morning, a car arrived at my apartment to take me to the airport. I climbed in, trying to clear my thoughts, but all I could focus on was the fact that I would be spending the next few days in China with Julia Smith. This was definitely not the kind of trip I had imagined. The car ride to the airport felt longer than it should have. Maybe it was because my mind was racing with doubts and questions. I replayed the moment in Charles's office over and over, trying to understand what I had gotten myself into. Julia Smith, the woman I had always known as my boss's wife, elegant and distant, was now my travel companion for an overseas business trip. I couldn't help but wonder why she needed me to accompany her. Was it personal? Was Charles pushing me into something I wasn't ready for? The questions kept piling up, but I had no answers. The car pulled up to the terminal, and I stepped out, taking a deep breath. The sky was overcast, and the air felt a little cooler than usual. The driver unloaded my bag, and I made my way toward the entrance, looking around. It was a busy morning at the airport, and the hustle and bustle seemed to drown out the noise in my head, if only for a moment. As I made my way through security and into the waiting area, I spotted Julia standing near the gate. She looked as poised as ever, dressed in a fitted coat, her hair perfectly styled. She was flipping through her phone, completely at ease. I stood there, still trying to make sense of the strange situation unfolding before me. I walked over and tried to force a calm expression. "Hey, Julia," I said. She looked up with a warm, relaxed smile, completely unbothered by the situation. "Aiden, glad you could make it," she replied. I nodded, though I could barely focus on her words as my nerves began to take over. "Of course," I muttered. "Ready for the flight?" She tilted her head slightly, her eyes sparkling with a mysteriousness I didn't fully understand. "I suppose so," she said. "I think we're both in for quite the adventure, don't you?" I forced a smile, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, definitely," I said. We boarded the plane, and I took my seat next to her. The flight to China was long, too long to be comfortable for anyone. The entire time, I struggled to make casual conversation, but Julia seemed completely at ease. She read a book, checked her emails, and occasionally glanced at me with that same intriguing smile of hers. I, on the other hand, spent the entire flight lost in thought. The whole idea of being on this trip feeling so surreal. What was I supposed to do while we were there? Was I just supposed to be her assistant? Was Charles trying to get me out of the office for a few days? Or was there something more to it? I couldn't figure out the real purpose of this trip, and it was frustrating. Eventually, the flight landed, and I was jolted out of my thoughts as the plane began its descent into Beijing. The city stretched out below, a sprawling mix of modern skyscrapers and ancient structures. I tried to focus on the view, but my mind remained tangled with uncertainty. The airport was crowded when we arrived, and we made our way through customs and to baggage claim, where a driver was waiting for us with a sign bearing my name. Julia didn't seem bothered by the busy crowd. She simply walked with grace, her head held high. Meanwhile, I felt like a nervous tourist, unsure of what to expect next. The driver led us to a sleek black sedan, and we were driven to the hotel. As we traveled through the city, I noticed the stark contrast of the buildings, the grandeur of the new structures alongside the old ones. Beijing was a city of contrasts, and I had to admit there was something beautiful in the way it blended the past with the present. When we arrived at the hotel, I was taken aback by its luxury. The lobby was immaculate, decorated with intricate patterns that combined modernity and tradition. As we checked in, I couldn't help but glance at Julia. She seemed completely at ease here, as if this place mirrored the life she led. Elegant, high class, and worlds apart from mine. The receptionist handed us the room keys, and I followed Julia to the elevator. When we got off on the same floor, I was surprised to find that our rooms were right next to each other. It was a small detail, but it struck me as odd. Charles had arranged this so it didn't feel like an accident. I couldn't understand why he'd want us so close, especially considering the nature of our professional relationship. We exchanged goodbyes in the hallway, and I went to my room. I set my bag down and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. I had no idea what the next few days would bring, but I had a feeling they were going to change everything. I unpacked and took a quick shower, trying to shake off the jet lag. The hotel room was strange, luxurious but impersonal. Everything was perfectly arranged, yet nothing felt familiar. Around midnight, I was working on my laptop, catching up on emails and finishing a few projects. My mind kept drifting back to the situation I was in. Why had Charles sent me here? What was I supposed to do now? Just as I was preparing to call it a night, I heard a soft knock at the door. I froze. Who could it be at this hour? I stood up and walked to the door, unsure of what to expect. When I opened it, I was met with Julia standing there, holding a glass bottle of whiskey. I blinked, momentarily speechless. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice smooth and confident. I didn't know how to respond, but before I could say anything, she slipped past me and walked into the room. "I thought we could have a drink," she said casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I was taken aback. Don't drink," I said, still in shock from her sudden appearance. "Come on," she smiled, her eyes gleaming. "Just one drink. It's been a long day. We should relax a little." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, but something about the situation, about her, kept me from doing so. I nodded reluctantly. "All right, just one." She poured 2 glasses and handed me one. We clinked glasses, and for a moment, I almost felt like I was on vacation, away from the pressure of the office, away from all the lingering questions in my mind. We talked. Well, Julia talked. She shared her thoughts on the pressures of her life, her marriage to Charles, and how everything seemed perfect on the outside but felt empty on the inside. It wasn't what I expected. She wasn't just some rich woman floating through life with everything handed to her. No, there was more beneath the surface. As the night went on, I found myself listening intently. The whiskey made it easier to let my guard down, though I wasn't sure if I was more captivated by her words or by the strange connection that seemed to be forming between us. By the time the night had worn on, we had talked about everything and nothing, and I found myself in a daze, unsure of what had just happened. She smiled at me, a little more tired now. "Thank you for listening," she said softly. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "Of course," I replied. With that, she left, but not before brushing a soft kiss on my cheek as if it had been the most natural thing in the world. I closed the door behind her, still trying to process what had just occurred. My mind was swirling with thoughts and emotions. What did it all mean? Why did it feel like something had shifted between us? The days started to blur together after that night. Each morning, I woke up in a strange, unfamiliar city, and each night I struggled to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. I couldn't stop thinking about Julia. It wasn't just her presence. It was her words, her vulnerability, the way she revealed a side of herself I hadn't expected. Her smile, soft and knowing, lingered in my mind, even though I tried to push it away. Before this trip, I had been so certain about my place in the world, so sure of who I was and where I was headed. But now, everything felt uncertain, as if I were standing at the edge of something I couldn't fully comprehend. Julia remained poised and composed during the day, but there were moments, fleeting moments, when I saw a crack in her armor. The way she'd stare out the window with a distant look in her eyes, or the quiet sigh she'd let out when she thought no one was paying attention. It was as though there was a storm inside her, and I was starting to see just a hint of it. But I didn't know what to do with that knowledge. The work itself was demanding, of course. We had meetings every day, discussing business deals, setting up partnerships, and going through presentations for clients. I could see why Charles had sent me. He wanted me to learn the ropes, to be exposed to this high stakes world. But honestly, I didn't care much about that anymore. Not when every moment spent with Julia made it harder to focus on anything else. The tension between us was undeniable, even when we were in meetings with other people. There were stolen glances, half smiles exchanged when no one was looking. And when we were alone in the hotel room, the air was thick with unspoken words, as if something was about to change. I was growing restless. I couldn't just ignore what was happening. One evening, after another long day of work, we found ourselves sitting together at a small cafe near the hotel. The city's lights twinkled in the distance, and the air felt heavier than usual. I watched Julia as she stirred her tea, the silence stretching between us. I knew we both felt it. The growing tension, the pull we couldn't deny. Finally, she broke the silence. "Aiden," she said softly, her voice quieter than usual. "I think we need to talk." I froze for a moment, unsure of what she meant. Was she about to tell me that this whole thing had been a mistake? Was she going to push me away? The thought of losing the connection we had developed was almost unbearable, even though I didn't completely understand it. "About what?" I asked, my voice betraying my uncertainty. She looked at me, her gaze steady and intense. "About us." I swallowed hard. This was it. The moment where everything would change. "I don't know what's going on, Aiden," she continued, her voice quiet. "But something has shifted. I can't ignore it anymore. You're different. There's something about you that makes me feel like I can be real, and I don't know if I should feel this way. But I do." Her words hit me like a wave. I wanted to speak, to tell her how I felt, but nothing came out. Instead, I just nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. She was right. Everything had changed. I hadn't expected any of this. "When I asked you to come with me on this trip," she said, her hands gripping the sides of her cup, "it was supposed to be just business, but somewhere along the way, it became something else." I could feel the weight of her words, and I understood. I had felt it too. The connection, the unspoken bond between us. But I was scared. Scared of what it meant. Scared of where it might lead. "I don't know what to say, Julia," I confessed. "I never thought I'd be in this situation, but I can't deny that there's something real here." She met my gaze, her eyes softening. "I don't know what it is either, but I can't keep pretending that I don't feel it." She leaned back in her chair, her expression a mixture of frustration and relief. "But we're in a complicated situation. You're Charles's employee, and I'm married." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was as if the universe had just slapped me in the face. The reality of the situation crashed down on me in that moment. She was married to Charles. And here we were, talking about feelings and connections. It was a mess. "I get it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't easy." "No," she whispered, "but it's real." The silence grew between us, and I could feel the tension in the air. There was so much unsaid. Things we both knew but weren't ready to say aloud. "I don't know what will happen after this trip, Aiden," Julia said, finally breaking the silence. "But I need you to know I appreciate you being here for me. I don't know where this goes from here, and maybe we can't do anything about it, but I can't keep pretending that nothing is happening." "I understand," I said quietly, my mind racing. I wanted to say more. I wanted to tell her how I felt, to tell her that I didn't know where this would go either, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. But I didn't say anything. I didn't know how to. The conversation ended, and we both sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of everything hanging between us. I had no idea what the future would bring, but for the first time, I felt the weight of the decision we would both have to make. When we left the cafe, it was as if nothing had changed, but I knew that everything had. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Julia had said. The pull between us was undeniable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both standing on the edge of something we couldn't fully control. The question was no longer whether we would act on it, but whether we could stop ourselves from doing so. The days in China had begun to settle into a routine, but it felt off. Every morning, I'd wake up, get dressed, and head to the conference room where Julia and I would sit together, often with Charles, discussing the latest deals. But after the conversation we'd had at the cafe, everything felt different. I found myself watching her more closely, noticing the way she would absent-mindedly touch her ring, or the quiet sighs she'd let out when she thought no one was looking. There was something unspoken between us, something that we hadn't said but both knew was there. Every time our eyes met, there was an intensity, a spark neither of us could ignore. Yet, at the same time, we both acted as if everything was fine, pretending that there wasn't this weight hanging between us. The nights were harder. The first few nights after our conversation, Julia had been distant, keeping to herself. After our long days, I tried to stay busy, my mind consumed by work. But every time I opened my laptop, all I could think about was her. I tried to tell myself it was just a fleeting connection, but the truth was, I couldn't get her out of my head. Then one night, just as I was finishing up a project, I heard a soft knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Julia? I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say, unsure of what this would mean. But before I could speak, she smiled faintly, as if nothing had changed. "You're working late," she said, her voice soft but edged with something else. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "Just finishing up some things." She entered, but instead of immediately starting a conversation, she stood by the window looking out over the city. Her presence filled the room in a way that made everything else fade into the background. "I thought you might want some company," she said after a moment, turning to face me. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, that this was a bad idea, but another part of me was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. The tension between us had been building for days, and I knew we couldn't keep avoiding it. Instead of saying anything, I just gestured to the chair across from mine. "You can sit if you want." She walked over and sat down, crossing her legs and resting her elbows on her knees. For a moment, neither of us said anything, the silence growing heavier with each passing second. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell her how I felt, how much I wanted to say all the things we hadn't said, but something held me back. I didn't know if I could handle the truth of what was happening between us. Finally, she broke the silence. "Aiden, do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" I blinked, taken aback by the question. "What do you mean?" She sighed, her eyes distant. "I don't know. Like everything is laid out for you, and you just follow the path without questioning it. But deep down, you know it's not really you. That's how I feel sometimes. Like I'm living for someone else." Her words struck a chord deep inside me. I had always felt that way, following the rules, doing what was expected of me. But now, standing here in this room with Julia, sitting across from me, it felt like I was finally seeing a different path, one that wasn't laid out by anyone else. "I get that," I said quietly. "I've always felt like I was just following orders. But now I'm starting to wonder if I'm missing something." Julia looked at me, her gaze soft but intense. "I'm scared, Aiden. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I've spent my whole life trying to be what everyone expected, but now I don't know what's real anymore." I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her that I understood, that I was feeling the same way. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, trapped between the pull of my feelings and the reality of the situation. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now," I said softly. "But I think you deserve to know what's real, just like I do." She smiled, though it was a sad smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe, but the problem is, Aiden, that what's real doesn't always make sense. And the choices we make, they can change everything." I felt the weight of her words settle in my chest. She was right. What we were doing, what we were feeling, didn't make sense. But it felt real, and that was the part that scared me the most. The silence between us grew again, and I could feel the walls we had both been building around ourselves starting to crumble. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in days, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one struggling with this. Julia suddenly stood up, breaking the moment. "I should let you get some rest. We have an early morning tomorrow." I nodded, though part of me wanted to beg her to stay, to talk more, to figure this out. But I didn't. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Thank you, Aiden," she said softly. "For listening, for being here." I watched her leave, my heart heavy with everything we hadn't said. The door closed behind her, and I sat in the silence of the room, wondering just how much further we could push this before it all came crashing down. I had always been someone who prided myself on having control over my life, over my decisions. But the days since Julia and I had grown closer had unraveled that sense of control, piece by piece, until I no longer recognized the path I was on. The line between what I was supposed to do and what I wanted to do had blurred beyond recognition. When I woke up that morning, the hotel room felt different. The city outside the window seemed distant, as if I were no longer fully present in the world. Everything that had been building up over the past few days, the conversations, the late-night meetings, the lingering touches, had led to this moment. I knew what was coming. I just didn't know if I was ready for it. I forced myself out of bed and went through my usual routine, though everything felt off now. The weight of the decision I had to make pressed on me, almost physically. Then there was a knock at the door. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It was too early for any meetings or anything at all, but I already knew who it was. When I opened it, Julia stood there, her eyes weary but determined. She had that look again, the one that made everything else fade away. "We need to talk, Aiden," she said quietly. I nodded, stepping aside to let her enter. She didn't wait for an invitation and walked straight to the window, gazing out at the city with a far-off look. "I know what you're thinking," she began, her voice barely audible. "And I know I've put you in a tough spot." I stayed silent, unsure of what to say. What could I say? I had been in the same position for days, torn between my feelings for her and the reality of our situation. I had always tried to keep things professional, to separate my personal life, but now everything was different. "Julia," I started, my voice wavering despite my best efforts. "What are we doing? This isn't right. You're married and I'm just your husband's employee. This can't lead anywhere." Her eyes met mine then, and I saw something raw in them, something I had never noticed before. "I know," she whispered. "I know it's not right, but it's real, Aiden. What we've shared, what we've talked about, it's real, and I can't keep pretending it isn't." I took a step back, my mind racing. "But what about Charles?" I asked, even though I already knew what she'd say. "What about your marriage?" She winced, her face tightening as she spoke. "Charles is a good man," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "But he's not the man I need. He's not the man I want. And I haven't been honest with him, or with myself, for years." I exhaled a shaky breath. The words I had been holding back for so long were right there, on the tip of my tongue. But before I could say anything, Julia turned to face me completely, her eyes begging for understanding. "I don't expect you to choose, Aiden," she said. "I'm not asking you to throw everything away or ruin your career for me. But I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. I'm not looking for something casual, not just a fling. This—" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "This is something I can't just walk away from." There it was, the truth, and the weight of it hung between us, heavy and suffocating. For days, I'd tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that I could move on, that we could pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The bond between us was undeniable, and the longer I ignored it, the harder it became to breathe. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted quietly, the words feeling like a confession. "I don't know if I can live with the consequences." Julia stepped closer, her hand gently brushing against mine. "You don't have to decide right now," she said softly. "But I need to know. Are you willing to try?" Her words lingered in the air, and for a moment I felt as though I might suffocate under the weight of the choice she was offering. I had always played it safe, done what was expected of me, but now I had to decide what was right for me. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what I had to do. I had been given a glimpse of a life that could be more. Something real. Something that made my heart race instead of just following the rhythm of routine. "I'm willing to try," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "But I don't know where this will lead. I don't know what will happen." She smiled then, a genuine smile. Not the sad, resigned one I had seen too often. It was the kind of smile that made everything feel possible. "I don't know either," she admitted, "but for once I'm not afraid of that." I didn't know what the future held. There were too many questions, too many unknowns, but for the first time I didn't feel the need to have all the answers. I had made my choice, and whatever came next, I would face it head on. We spent the rest of the day in silence, each lost in our thoughts. As evening approached and we prepared to board the flight back to the US, I couldn't help but wonder how things would change once we got home. Would we be able to keep this secret? Would the reality of our situation catch up to us? But as I looked at Julia standing next to me, I realized that those questions didn't matter. What mattered was that, for once, I wasn't afraid to step into the unknown. I wasn't afraid to follow my heart, wherever it might lead. Weeks passed since we came back from China. The city felt different somehow, like the world kept moving around me while I stood still. Julia and I continued to walk the fine line between desire and reality. The secret we shared, the stolen moments, became our sanctuary. But every time we parted, the weight of everything else came crashing down. I hadn't expected it to be this hard. I thought that after the whirlwind of our trip, we'd find some peace, some way to make it work, even if just for a little while. But the pressure of our secret gnawed at us, especially when we were surrounded by the constant buzz of daily life. Julia still kept her distance during the day, acting as though nothing had changed, but I could feel the tension between us, the way we both hesitated before making any move, always calculating the risk of being seen. I tried to focus on work, on anything that could distract me from the quiet, constant state of longing I was living in. But every time I thought about her, the weight of it all came rushing back. I couldn't help but smile. It was illogical, but I didn't care. Julia was more than just the woman I had fallen for. She was my escape from the mundane, a reminder that life could be more than just going through the motions. That afternoon, as I was leaving the office, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Julia. "Can you meet me? I need to talk." My heart skipped a beat. By now, we had learned that messages like this weren't casual. They were serious. When Julia wanted to talk, it meant something was going on. Without hesitation, I responded, "Of course, where?" The reply came almost immediately. "Same place as last time, 8 p.m. I knew exactly where she meant. A small park hidden away from the main streets where we had spent countless hours together. It was secluded, a hidden gem in the heart of the city, where we could talk without the fear of being watched. As the hours passed, my anticipation grew. I couldn't stop wondering what she needed to discuss. I had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to be good. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe the burden of keeping our secret had finally become too much for her to handle. I tried to tell myself not to overthink it, but the uncertainty gnawed at me. At 8 p.m., I arrived at the park. It was dark, the air crisp and cool, with the distant hum of traffic in the background. I spotted Julia sitting on one of the benches, her face lit by the soft glow of a nearby lamp. She looked beautiful, as always, but there was something different about her tonight. She seemed troubled. "Hey," I said softly, approaching her, my voice full of concern. "What's going on?" Julia turned to face me, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite read. She stood and motioned for me to sit. "I've been thinking a lot, Aiden," she began, her voice tense. "About us, about everything." My stomach tightened. "What are you thinking?" I asked cautiously, bracing myself for whatever she was about to say. She took a deep breath, looking away for a moment as if searching for the right words. "I can't keep living like this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't keep hiding. I love what we have. I do. But I can't keep pretending it's nothing, like we're just two people having a casual thing. It's not fair to either of us, and it's not fair to Charles, even though he doesn't know." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I sat there, taking in everything she had said. The pressure had clearly built up over time, and I knew it had been weighing on her for a while. I wanted to say something, but for a moment the right words escaped me. "You're not saying you want to end this, are you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. Julia's eyes softened and she shook her head. "No, not exactly. I just don't know how long we can keep doing this. It's starting to feel like we're living a lie." I understood what she meant. It wasn't just the secrecy. It was the constant tension, the fear of getting caught, the worry that everything would come crashing down. We had built something beautiful, but it was fragile, held together by the secrecy and uncertainty that surrounded us. "I don't want to lose you." I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I can't lose you. Julia stepped closer, her hand gently touching mine. You won't lose me, she whispered. But we have to figure this out. I can't keep living like this, but I don't want to lose you either. The night stretched out around us, still and quiet as we sat in silence, both lost in our thoughts. I knew what she was saying was true. This couldn't go on forever. But for that moment, I allowed myself to hold on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could make it work. That we could find a way to be together without the constant burden of secrecy weighing us down. In the weeks that followed, things remained complicated. Julia and I continued to see each other, but the tension was always there, lurking just below the surface. We couldn't be open, couldn't be free. But in the stolen moments we shared, I found solace. I found love. And for now, that was enough. Julia was still married to Charles, and we both knew our secret couldn't last forever. But as we moved forward, carving out time for each other in a world determined to keep us apart, we held on to the belief that love, in its truest form, was worth fighting for, even if it meant staying in the shadows a little longer.